Okay, thanks Satinder. Welcome everyone at our look at Canada-US relations under the new Biden administration. My name is Dan Kisselback. I am a lawyer and practicing in the area of international trade and customs law. And with me is Dave Pentland of Carson International, Vice President and a very experienced customs broker who we work with. Over to the next slide, Satinder. We wanted to, just because this is touching on legal issues, just to say that this is not legal advice, and anything that we say here is just background information. If you need advice or information, please reach out to Dave or myself directly. Next slide. Dave, over to you.
Just welcome everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on your time zone. I enjoy speaking with Dan on various topics throughout the year, and look forward to today's sort of crystal ball at what Canada has got to look forward to under the Biden administration in the United States.
Yes. On to the next slide, Satinder, please. Satinder's the maestro behind all this in the background, orchestrating our slides today. I can't think and do slides at the same time. So here we go. Without further ado, trade under the Biden administration. So we're going from America First, President Trump, to Build Back Better, President Biden. And here, I suppose, because Satinder did this, he provided us with this catch line: leaders become great not because of their power, but because of their ability to empower others. Here in this situation, trade policy is central to US domestic and international challenges. Trade policy will be a tool in the Biden administration. Their stated approach is foreign policy for the middle class, a renewed focus on the ability to empower the middle class. So trade policy will be focused to achieve US interests ranging from revitalizing the US economy, tackling climate change, and addressing concerns over China's rise in economic power, as well as human rights issues. So there is going to likely be a focus on multilateralism. We see the Biden administration is likely to adopt a more multilateral approach, although there might not be much political appetite to enter into huge multilateral deals, whereas the Trump administration was more focused on deals that were one-on-one. And there will be an interest to focus on China and EU and others as allies. And a more holistic approach to trade agreements if and when the time is ripe to do so. Dave, any comments?
I would just say that we'll see a more of a holistic approach on the FTAs and trade policy, and more political support for trade. And trade agreements may not be first and foremost under the Biden administration. I think he's if you look at the 33 executive orders he signed in his first 6 days in office, 15 of them are dealing with the coronavirus, which is certainly a change in the administration. But certainly, I think there's going to be a more global and bilateral approach to free trade agreements, and certainly Canada can sit by and hopefully our newfound friends again in the United States are going to do the right thing. So,
on to the next slide, Satinder. So we've outlined what we saw as the Trump administration's three main trade targets, or several. One was reversing the trade deficit with China. There was a surplus, and this arose well before President Trump took office. There was concerns about the trade imbalance between China and the US. And President Trump began to impose a tariff wall and began to deal with China. It became quite an involved trade war in some respects. The world's biggest economic powers began with tariff disputes, and there were sanctions on technology and other matters. There were controls, I should say. A tougher approach, however, has met with quite a significant level of resistance, and this campaign has not borne as much fruit as President Trump had once hoped. He's leaving, President Trump has left President Biden with a blueprint of what has worked and what hasn't worked. So that is the good part. There has been some experience in dealing with China over the last 4 years, and some things have worked and what hasn't, and some things haven't. There has been also a shakeup of the World Trade Organization. The complaint, I think, on the part of the US has been that the US has breached global trading rules by imposing levies. There has been a complaint that China has been cheating in the trade sphere, and the US imposed some trade levies on Chinese goods. The Chinese complained about that, and the WTO said that the US breached global trading rules by imposing levies on more than $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. This caused quite a consternation on the part of the Trump administration, and the criticism on the part of the Trump administration of the WTO was that it was inadequate to stop China's harmful practices, particularly with respect to technology transfers and so forth. So that was another element. Another third element is increasing manufacturing in the United States. 10 out of 11 of the US the auto plants that were for manufacturing had moved or were built in Mexico prior to the Trump administration taking office. There was some hope that the American First strategy would result in onshoring of manufacturing. However, there is indications that manufacturing has fallen a significant level, and that the strategies followed by the Trump administration didn't lead to as much benefit as one would have hoped. On to the next slide. So some of the outcomes, there was enhanced US-China trade friction. There was some concern, as I mentioned, about US interests being required by China to turn over their intellectual property and technology, and a desire on the part of the US to control that on national security grounds. There were damaged relations with some allies. Some Canadians will recall the imposition of high tariffs on aluminum and steel on national security grounds. The pullout from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was spearheaded by President Obama, and deliberate steps to weaken the WTO. There was also a realization that the US and other countries were vulnerable to disruptions in supply chains, and the pandemic showed this quite dramatically, that there was a lack of resilience in the supply chain, and there now has been a call for onshoring of some manufacturing, especially in the area of medical and security type goods. Dave, any comments?
I would just say on the global supply chain, it's something that I think Trump did a good job is pointing out that the pandemic exposed weaknesses and that how North America was reliant on other countries to help them in the midst of a pandemic. So I have to give him full credit for that. And I think also at the same time, you have to point out that you can't fight with countries at the same time you're trying to rely on them. So it opens the door for the Biden administration to patch up differences and open the dialogue with China. You just can't fight when obviously you require certain products from countries.
Next slide, Satinder, please. So highlights, again, the President Trump practically on the first day of office withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was a huge multilateral deal. It hadn't gone through Congress, but it was still alive. The protectionist and America First strategy, building a tariff wall through various means, various pieces of legislation were used to increase tariffs in the case of China up to 25%, and renegotiation of various deals, including the former NAFTA and now the new NAFTA, the USMCA or CUSMA as we call it in Canada, and then a China trade war, protracted trade war that included tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese imports and economic retaliation from Beijing on especially agricultural products exported from the US, and a series of stop-start negotiations. Next slide, please. There's also a walk away from a range of instruments and deals. And it was interesting to see because these were arrangements in a world order that the US led and helped create. Notably, the Trump administration hampered the WTO's ability to deal with disputes in trade and block new appointments and threatened outright withdrawal. Next slide, please. So, new administration and new considerations. President Biden is going to have a lot of choices to make over the next little while, and every year we get an inkling of how the U.S. will approach matters through the USTR and their outline of trade policy considerations. We haven't gotten that yet, but we do have a sense over the election period and other times as to how President Biden will tackle these problems. The US president, as was shown by President Trump, wields, I should say, incredible power. In some other presentations, I've described this as Trump as stroke of the pen risk, in the sense that a US president can raise tariffs by executive order, by stroke of a pen. And it doesn't take too much to do this. There are various pieces of legislation that can be used to increase tariffs. So the Biden administration will also be able to exercise enormous power, but it may be less dramatic or less volatile. Catherine Tai, in her first speech as the nominee as U.S. Trade Representative, has said that the Biden administration's trade policy will focus on helping American workers by ensuring trade agreements protect and enhance U.S. jobs, and will not just ensure that there are low consumer prices resulting from trade. The Biden administration will also confront China over its trade practices, and it will enforce the USMCA or the CUSMA agreement. The general slogan is that it is a worker-centered trade policy, and it is recognized that trade policy must benefit regular workers and communities. And that starts with a recognition that people are not just consumers, but they're workers too. Dave?
Yeah, I would just say one comment is just yesterday, Biden signed the executive order on the Made in America or America First. And I think that's one that Canada has to closely monitor and try and build our relationship up again with the United States, and that it should be more of a North American fortress again, where we promote parties. We just renegotiated NAFTA under the USMCA, and that we're all in this together, and that hopefully by going America First policy doesn't disrupt our highly integrated supply chains, because Canada and the United States are so integrated. And now I'm especially targeting the auto pact in Eastern Canada, and that affects our dollar. It affects all the industries downstream. So I think it's become upon Trudeau, and it's nice to see that Biden reached out to Trudeau as the first foreign leader that he spoke to on Friday after he was taken over the presidency. That's hopefully is a start of things to come, that we can put aside some of our differences on these tips we've had on steel and aluminum, and open the borders back up between Canada and the United States. So it's I'm optimistic.
Yeah, so I think you're referring to the Buy America policy, and so yeah, that's going to be a big deal. Now we'll talk about that in a couple slides, but I agree with you that it's going to be a focus point going forward. Next slide, please, Cinder. So there will be a prioritization of reshoring of medical and other critical supplies chains, as I mentioned, recognition that there's some vulnerability in this respect. There will be a delay in negotiating a new trade deals. President Trump disrupted the status quo in the name of better deals. NAFTA was renegotiated because he thought it was a very terrible deal, and so we came up with the USMCA, or the CUSMA. President Biden will probably deal with new deals, but nothing's going to happen likely until the U.S. makes domestic investments and deals with certain domestic issues, such as the pandemic, and get itself back on track. We suspect that the USMCA may be used as a template for new agreements going forward, especially with respect to the enforcement of labor protections and environmental protections. And President Biden will also have to deal with the issue of how to re-engage with the WTO and revamping the WTO dispute process, which was a controversy that predated President Trump. Next slide, please. So we expect that there'll be more of a consensus building approach taken, that President Biden will work with the allies to unite them, such as the EU, in a common front against China, and some of the rhetoric of the Biden administration may be similar to the Trump administration's approach insofar as there will be a call for aggressive retaliation against trade cheating. There will also, as we've seen already, be an approach that recognizes that global warming is a serious issue, and trade policies will be in part of the approach that deals with global warming. Next slide. We expect that the Biden administration may roll back the Section 301 tariffs, the 25% tariffs that President Trump imposed on Chinese products. However, President Biden has indicated that he won't immediately lift the China tariffs. He's argued that Washington needs to keep its leverage on Beijing for now. Next slide. Before I talk about the Keystone XL pipeline, I wanted to raise the issue of Buy America. There was a report in 2019 issued by the US government indicating that of the $290 billion worth of US government contracts issued in 2015, Canadian firms got about 674 million. So it's not an insignificant number for our country. It is a matter of quite concern and interest on the part of Canadian exporters, Canadian manufacturers, and those who want to sell into the United States and sell to customers that have a government link, because we're dealing with usually government procurement issues. So it was of a concern when we learned that President Biden signed an executive order to strengthen the Buy America provisions. The executive order directs agencies to close loopholes in how Made in America products are measured so that there can be an increase in the amount of product that must be made in the US for it to qualify under Buy American law. So there is a move. It's not a shock. We kind of thought that it would be happening, but it's happening quite quickly. The Canadian government has been in communications with the US government over this issue. There is a hope that Team Canada can make its approach as it has in the past with respect to negotiating other matters such as the CUSMA, the USMCA, and dealing with national security tariffs that were imposed, that there will be a full court press, in other words, on this particular issue, so that any other orders or pieces of legislation will be handled in a manner that recognizes the mutual interests that Canada and the US have in trade. Any further comments on that particular thought, David?
Yeah, I would just say that this is not a new Buy America. We actually originated under the Obama administration, and since Biden was sitting in the second chair at that time, and at that time, Canada did negotiate with the United States, and that's how we got the 674 million of US contracts. So I think that's going to be the blueprint for under the Biden administration. So I don't think Canada should just be shocked at it. It's just something that it's another round of the same, and I'm optimistic that Canadian companies will get their fair share. It's just we'll have to watch the language, and hopefully we have a little bit of input into how the language is adopted, and that it's softer like it was under Obama to Canada versus the rest of the world. So that's my comments.
Yeah. Keystone XL, we've all read the news as part of the climate change plan. President Biden has issued an executive order essentially putting an end to this $8 billion pipeline, a years-long project that would have carried oil sands crude from Alberta to the American Gulf Coast. And the pipeline has come to signify the debate over whether fossil fuels should be left in the ground or not. So that was quickly issued, and I think that the Canadian ambassador to the US has said that Canada's concerns were heard, but that this was an election promise that was made by President Biden, and that's the end of that. There has been a promise to participate in the WTO's rules and processes, which could be helpful to Canada. For example, Canada has commenced WTO action on China's treatment of canola exports There have been restrictions, some say as retaliation for other measures Canada has put in place. So there's hope that the WTO disputes resolution process will continue and be bolstered by the US. Another example is the WTO ruling that the US must end its mandatory country of origin labeling on Canadian beef and pork. For many years, farm groups and consumer advocates in the US advocated for this labeling, which served, the Canadians said, to restrict or limit or shut out Canadian suppliers into the US. The law hasn't been enforced since 2016, and that issue, if it came up again, would possibly be dealt with in the WTO. Another issue that's possibly of concern for Canadian exporters is agriculture subsidies. You may see some concern on the part of Canadians that they're being unfairly dealt with insofar as the US has provided extensive subsidies to US farmers. And apparently the direct government payments in 2020 are in the area of about almost 40 billion, constituting about 36% of net farm income. So farm subsidies are a big deal. And that is also an area where possibly the WTO could get involved. Farm subsidies have arisen because of the President Trump's approach with China and the Chinese decision to impose barriers to US exports into China. Next slide, please. So I guess let's go on to the next one. We talked about this one already. We're looking to the Biden administration to form alliances with Canada, Australia, and South Korea to counter China's influence. There was the Trans-Pacific Partnership that was a mega deal negotiated by US President Obama and 11 other countries, excluding China. In its original format, the deal would have been the largest trade agreement ever, covering approximately 40% of the global economy, but the deal never passed Congress, and President Trump pulled out in 2017. There probably is a desire on the part of the Biden administration to rejoin the trade deal, but politically on both sides of the aisle, the ideal right now of more trade liberalization is probably not going to be wildly accepted within the US populace. There's more concern about onshoring possibly and building back America better. And so another mega deal right now is probably not in the offing. After the US withdrawal, the remaining 11 members of the Trans-Pacific Partnership rebranded the deal. It was called the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. Canada has taken advantage of that. And here in Canada, we've been able to trade with the third largest economy in the world, Japan and others, more freely as a result of this particular deal. And we're benefiting where the American manufacturers and producers and exporters have been shut out. So there's at least one senator, Bob Corker, former senator, who has said recently that the TPP was a missed opportunity for the US to put a lot of pressure on China. And some of the US producers and manufacturers kind of want into some sort of larger agreement. Next slide, please. To add a little complexity to the arrangements now is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which was spearheaded by China. Things have progressed since the Obama administration, and this agreement is an Asian-focused 15-country agreement, which accounts for 30% of the world's GDP. So it's a fairly large agreement, multilateral agreement, and it, in some ways, resulted from America's shifting attitude away from entering into multilateral agreements, away from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and it allowed for China to enter into its own agreement in Asia. So we see now a large trade bloc within Asia, and another counterbalance being the North America trade bloc, being the USMCA or the CUSMA. President Biden has indicated that the US needs to negotiate with allies to set trading rules to counter China's influence, but there is a recognition that the US only makes up 25% of the economy of the world. It has to work with other allies. Dave, any thoughts on that one?
Just that I truly believe that going back to the CPTPP is not dead with the US signing. I think if the US can figure out how to enforce IPR issues and technology transfers with China, that they would like to be involved, but it's just a big if around that. That's the real thing that certainly, I have to give credit to President Trump for bringing to light, that these are issues that affect the world when you talk about IPR and technology. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with an economy that's controlled by the government, all the information is controlled by the government. So you get into where freedom of speech and language and entire things that are published both electronically and written are totally controlled by the government. I think the globe is now aware of this. And so I think that you're going to see the United States revisit this if they can actually get some strength and some partners around the globe, but enforcing that China step up and take some issues. But I guess the time will tell.
Yeah, so I guess right now, Canada is part of the Trans-Pacific Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. There is a trade deal for Canada. The US is shut out of that deal. There is a concern that the US is being shut out of or not as having as much influence as it should in the Asia Pacific region. There is concern on the part, as you can see, of the part of the governmental officials and business folks that more needs to be done in this area. I noted that the president or the vice president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Myron Brilliant, said recently that he was concerned that Washington was being left behind following the signing of the RCEP, and that something needed to be done, but that the U.S. should not join this trade bloc because it doesn't set the appropriate rules of the game. That there more needs to be done on the areas of digital trade, and requiring or preventing China from requiring technology transfers in order to do business in China, non-tariff barriers and intellectual property protections, so forth. And these things, many Americans feel, are not dealt with appropriately in the RCEP. Next slide, please. Other deals are being considered. Recently, there was a discussion between British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who had a conversation with President Biden, indicating that he's eager to forge a new US-UK deal. It seems to me that it's a higher priority for Prime Minister Johnson than it would be for President Biden. The UK regained control over its national trade policy following the post-Brexit transition period, and is scrambling to enter into arrangements around the world with folks to capture more liberalized trade in the circumstances. So we'll see what happens on that score. But right now, President Biden's dealing with a $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief plan. And I think that's the focus in the immediate future, not on a trade deal with the UK. Next slide. So we say here that we don't see any new trade deals right in the immediate future. And so we'll just have to see how this plays out as the administration carries on, and we will probably look to see the USTR issue a trade policy document setting out the priorities for the upcoming year and the next year. Next slide. Export controls have been a big deal over the last while. We expect to see the US consulting with its allies to implement stronger controls. Export controls and sanctions will continue. We expect to see the Biden administration to continue to use unilateral sanctions and controls as a means of foreign policy, but there will be a greater effort in gathering steam, gathering strength through the support of other allies, and a desire to tackle some of the tough issues multilaterally. This approach has met with the approval of certain business groups. For example, SEMI, which is a semiconductor equipment maker and device manufacturers worldwide, has said that unilateral rules have harmed the business and were less effective over time, hurt American industries and left US exporters vulnerable to retaliation. And so there is a call for the Biden administration and the incoming Commerce Secretary to work with allies when curbing sales of US technology to China for national security concerns. Next slide, please. So here we are in the first period of the Biden administration. These are the top things that we see. US economy first, build back better being this slogan. We're going away from America first, but to build back better. Sounds like there's going to be a focus on domestic strength, increasing jobs, and righting the good ship USA post-pandemic. We will be in Canada looking to follow the Buy America policy and to support the Canadian government in its approach, as Team Canada does, to make sure that Canadian interests, the interests of Canadian exporters and suppliers and manufacturers, are considered when any further support or bolstering of Buy America legislation and policy is made. Working with allies, we expect that the US is going to work more closely in its approach with trade, including the WTO and elsewhere, to advance shared interests. And finally, climate action, as we've already seen with the Keystone XL, the US will want to resume global leadership in fighting climate change, and its policies are going to reflect that. David, your thoughts?
I guess in summing up, we failed to kind of look at softwood lumber and our long-standing issue with the United States. But you know, softwood lumber is a problem that never gets solved; it only gets managed. And I think it'd be nice to get back to where that's the only trade issue that we fight on is softwood lumber, and then put everything else to rest. So I don't see any changes to softwood lumber, but I certainly look forward to that being one of the only things we fight about. And I guess I believe, my personal belief is Joe Biden will be better for overall business, because he'll be more predictable. One thing that the markets and manufacturing and people like is predictability. It's not being wanting to be political, but it's nice not to have legislation adopted from tweets versus it's nice to see a legislation adopted, go through the House, go through the Senate, and the president signs off on it versus starting with the president's stroke of the pen. So, and I guess my last thing is that, the Biden administration did not win a landslide, and that he has to carefully adapt his programs with countries around the United States, including Canada, and pacify the deep red states in the middle of the United States that that did not vote for him. So it was refreshing in his inauguration speech to see that these are areas that he's trying to bring the country together. And I think by a more united America, Canada can only benefit. So I'm hoping that once the globe gets the pandemic under control, that we're going to get back to the economies chugging along and we see GDP rise in countries. So kind of my wrap-up comments. So.
Very well, yeah, this isn't total comprehensive of all the trade irritants. Of course, every year the US government produces a report on those trade irritants, and we'll be looking forward to seeing how the US government, the Biden administration, approaches those irritants this time around. The other one that I'm recalling right now is supply management and access into Canada around the Canadian tariff wall for agricultural goods and so forth. So that's another one, including to softwood lumber that never seemed to go away. With that, I'd like to end. I want to thank you for joining us. We look forward to providing another presentation to you in the near future. Stay safe and be well. Bye for now.
Thank you. Take care. Bye now.